I didn't change to prove them wrong. I changed to save myself. When I lost everything and everyone walked away, I thought my story was over. But life doesn't end when someone leaves you. Sometimes it begins there. I was abandoned while carrying a child in my body and a future on my shoulders. I cried. I broke. I begged life for mercy, but I stood back up every time. And after 20 years of struggle, sacrifice, and rebuilding, something happened I never expected. The man who left me, the man who vanished before my daughter was born, came back. He returned not because he loved us, but because life finally humbled him. And when he stood on my doorstep, I wasn't the broken woman he abandoned. I was the mother who survived, the woman who rose, the person he never believed I could be. He looked over my shoulder into my home, searching the walls, the warmth, the life I created without him. He smiled as if no time had passed at all and said, "Hello, Jane," like we were old friends. I didn't answer. For a moment, the ticking clock in the hallway and my heartbeat were the only sounds. 20 years of silence pressed against my chest. 20 years where he never asked if his baby was alive or dead. When he looked at me, he didn't see the girl he broke. He saw the woman who survived. He asked, "Can I come in?" as if he had earned a place inside my life. I felt my body tense, not from fear, but from every memory rushing back at once. I already knew why he returned. People don't come back when they hurt you. They come back when they need you. But before I answered him, I had to relive the history that brought me to this moment. So let me tell you how we got here. Before the knock. Before the moment everything changed. I met him when I was 19 in a tiny cafe that smelled like cheap coffee and rain. He sat at the table next to mine and asked if he could borrow my pen, and that's how everything began. We talked for hours like we had known each other forever. I mistook comfort for destiny. He told me I wasn't like other girls, that I was the kind of woman men marry, not just date. When you've never truly been seen before, you cling to the first person who says, "I see you." A year later, we were married, courthouse papers, a borrowed white dress, and promises whispered under our breath. I thought love was enough, that it could pay bills, fix moods, and cover the flaws neither of us wanted to face. But life in our little apartment was loud with dreams and quiet with responsibility. I worked 3 jobs. He jumped from one idea to the next, chasing shortcuts to success. He kept saying, "Big opportunities are coming," but the only big things that came were late bills. And still, I loved him. Love makes excuses long after reality stops offering them. The night I found out I was pregnant, I held the test in my hands and shook with fear and joy. I told him with a smile, waiting for him to pull me close, call it our miracle, our beginning. But instead, he asked, "Are we ready for this?" Not with excitement, but with panic. I said yes, because I needed us to be ready. I needed this story to become a family. But after that night, he changed. Every time I mentioned the baby, his silence grew louder. He stayed out longer, smelled of beer, and called it networking. Anything to escape reality. He talked big about success, but wouldn't show up for the life already in front of him. The night I walked in and saw him packing a bag, my heart sank before I even asked where he was going. He said he was leaving town to meet an investor who would change everything. I said, "But the baby?" hoping that the word alone would make him stay. He kissed my forehead, not with love, but with escape, and said, "I'll call you." I didn't change to prove them wrong. I changed to save myself. When I lost everything and everyone walked away, I thought my story was over. But life doesn't end when someone leaves you. Sometimes it begins there. I was abandoned while carrying a child in my body and a future on my shoulders. I cried. I broke. I begged life for mercy, but I stood back up every time. And after 20 years of struggle, sacrifice, and rebuilding, something happened I never expected. The man who left me, the man who vanished before my daughter was born, came back. He returned not because he loved us, but because life finally humbled him. And when he stood on my doorstep, I wasn't the broken woman he abandoned. I was the mother who survived, the woman who rose, the person he never believed I could be. He looked over my shoulder into my home, searching the walls, the warmth, the life I created without him. He smiled as if no time had passed at all and said, "Hello, Jane," like we were old friends. I didn't answer. For a moment, the ticking clock in the hallway and my heartbeat were the only sounds. 20 years of silence pressed against my chest. 20 years where he never asked if his baby was alive or dead. When he looked at me, he didn't see the girl he broke. He saw the woman who survived. He asked, "Can I come in?" as if he had earned a place inside my life. I felt my body tense, not from fear, but from every memory rushing back at once. I already knew why he returned. People don't come back when they hurt you. They come back when they need you. But before I answered him, I had to relive the history that brought me to this moment. So let me tell you how we got here. Before the knock. Before the moment everything changed. I met him when I was 19 in a tiny cafe that smelled like cheap coffee and rain. He sat at the table next to mine and asked if he could borrow my pen, and that's how everything began. We talked for hours like we had known each other forever. I mistook comfort for destiny. He told me I wasn't like other girls, that I was the kind of woman men marry, not just date. When you've never truly been seen before, you cling to the first person who says, "I see you." A year later, we were married, courthouse papers, a borrowed white dress, and promises whispered under our breath. I thought love was enough, that it could pay bills, fix moods, and cover the flaws neither of us wanted to face. But life in our little apartment was loud with dreams and quiet with responsibility. I worked 3 jobs. He jumped from one idea to the next, chasing shortcuts to success. He kept saying, "Big opportunities are coming," but the only big things that came were late bills. And still, I loved him. Love makes excuses long after reality stops offering them. The night I found out I was pregnant, I held the test in my hands and shook with fear and joy. I told him with a smile, waiting for him to pull me close, call it our miracle, our beginning. But instead, he asked, "Are we ready for this?" Not with excitement, but with panic. I said yes, because I needed us to be ready. I needed this story to become a family. But after that night, he changed. Every time I mentioned the baby, his silence grew louder. He stayed out longer, smelled of beer, and called it networking. Anything to escape reality. He talked big about success, but wouldn't show up for the life already in front of him. The night I walked in and saw him packing a bag, my heart sank before I even asked where he was going. He said he was leaving town to meet an investor who would change everything. I said, "But the baby?" hoping that the word alone would make him stay. He kissed my forehead, not with love, but with escape, and said, "I'll call you." I woke up the next morning alone, his things gone, and the note on the table was colder than silence. "Don't worry, when I come back, everything will be different." The lie was the only thing he left behind. For days, I called his phone until the line said, "This number is no longer in service." I called his friends, his old jobs, anyone who might have known where he went. No one did. And then I felt the baby move for the first time. A tiny flutter inside me while I sat on the floor crying. I whispered to my stomach, "I'm here. Even if no one else is, I'm here." And that night, something changed. The girl who begged him to stay died, and a mother was born. I decided I would not chase the man who abandoned us. I would chase the life my child deserved. Months passed without a word from him, and then the day came when my body said, "It's time, the baby is coming." I went to the hospital alone, no hand to hold, just a bag, a name form, and a heart full of fear. A nurse asked gently, "Is the father on his way?" And I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "No, he's not." The contractions came like waves crashing over me, sharp, relentless. And between each one, I whispered to my baby, "We'll be okay." I screamed, not just from the physical pain, but from the grief of knowing he chose not to be there when life began. And then I heard it, the tiniest cry, the sound that stitched my broken heart back together in one breath. They placed her in my arms, this small, wrinkled, beautiful miracle, and I whispered, "Hi, Lily, I'm your mom." In that moment, I realized he didn't leave me with nothing. He left me with everything that mattered most. I promised her right there, "I don't know how, but I will give you a life better than the one I had." And then the real journey began. Not the romantic version of motherhood, but the raw, sleepless, hungry, unpaid version. The first years were a blur of diapers, night shifts, and tears shed quietly over sinkfuls of dishes. I worked early mornings at the store, came home to feed her, and sometimes went back out again for extra hours. There were days I felt like I was failing, like she deserved a better mother than a tired, overworked version of me. But every time she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, I knew I was enough simply because I stayed. Some nights, there was only enough food for one plate, and I watched her eat while I pretended I wasn't hungry. I learned what true sacrifice was, not dramatic gestures, but quiet choices no one ever claps for. I went to bed with an ache in my body, but a deeper ache in my heart, always asking, is this enough for her? And yet, every morning she woke up smiling at me like I was her entire world, and that gave me the courage to try again. I stopped waiting for someone to rescue us. I understood. No one was coming. I was the plan. I was the backup plan too. That realization didn't break me. It shaped me. I was no longer his abandoned wife. I was Lily's mother. One day, her school held a fundraiser, and I baked a simple batch of cupcakes with what little I could afford. I didn't expect anything, but parents started coming back, asking, "Who made these? Can we order more?" A teacher took me aside and said, "Jane, you're really talented. Have you ever thought about selling your baked goods?" I laughed at first. The idea sounded too big for a woman who could barely keep the lights on. But that night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and thought, what if this is the way out? I pulled out an old notebook and wrote down everything I knew how to bake and all the things I wanted to learn. I watched free tutorials on my cracked phone screen, replaying them while stirring batter in my tiny kitchen. I started with just 12 cupcakes at a time, selling them at school events, markets, and church gatherings. Lily would stand beside me with a little basket of cookies and say, "My mommy made these. Would you like to try one?" Every time she said those words, a broken piece of me stitched itself back together. One Saturday at a local fair, a well-dressed woman tried one of my red velvet cupcakes, and her eyebrows lifted in surprise. She took a business card from her purse and said, "Do you take custom orders?" And my heart nearly stopped. I almost said no, because I didn't believe someone like me was ready for something that big. But instead I whispered, "Not yet, but I can learn." And she smiled like she already believed I could. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I stared at her business card as if it glowed with possibility. My hand shook when I dialed her number, afraid she'd forgotten me, afraid she'd remember me. She answered immediately and said, "I was hoping you'd call. Meet me at the cafe tomorrow." I hung up the phone, sat on the kitchen floor, and cried quietly so I wouldn't wake my daughter. I cried because for the first time in years, something was breaking in my favor. The next morning, I wrapped Lily in her warmest coat and took her with me to the cafe interview. I was terrified the owner would judge me, the tired mum with flour on her jeans and a baby on her hip. But she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with respect no one else had given me in years. She asked me to bake a test batch right there in her kitchen. My hands trembled the entire time. When she took the first bite, I held my breath longer than my lungs could handle. And then she smiled, just one simple smile, but it felt like sunlight landing on my entire future. She said, "I want you to supply baked goods for my cafe." And for a moment, I couldn't speak. I nodded and whispered, "Thank you," because it was all my shaking voice could manage. I walked home pushing Lily's stroller, crying and laughing at the same time, because for once the world had said yes. I told myself, if this is the door opening, I won't let fear keep me on the other side. From that moment forward, survival wasn't enough. I needed to build a life. I burned cakes, messed up orders, overworked myself, but I learned from every failure. Lily sat in a corner of the cafe doing homework while I decorated wedding cakes. We grew together in that kitchen. Life was still hard, but for the first time, it was hard for something, not hard for nothing. And day by day, I stopped feeling like the woman who was left and started feeling like the woman who stayed. I didn't know it yet, but that cafe kitchen was the first step toward a life I thought I would never have. Working at the cafe changed everything, not suddenly, but slowly. beautifully, one batch of pastries at a time. My skills sharpened, my confidence grew, and customers began asking, "Who is the baker behind these desserts?" And through it all, Lily watched me, learning not just from my successes, but from my fights to earn them. She saw me come home tired, sore, flour on my face, but smiling because exhaustion with purpose feels different. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was building. And even if the world didn't clap, my daughter's eyes did. Soon orders became too many for the cafe alone. Weddings, corporate events, birthdays, requests overflowing my notebook. That was when I faced the choice that terrified me: stay safe or grow bigger. I applied for a small business grant, convinced myself they would reject me, but I applied anyway. When the approval email came, I covered my mouth and sobbed into my hands so Lily wouldn't hear me cry. It wasn't a miracle. It was the reward for years of refusing to quit. I rented a tiny commercial kitchen, nothing fancy, just stainless countertops and dreams taped to the walls. I put up the first sign that said, "Jane and Lily's Bakery." Seeing our names together almost took my breath away. I told Lily, "This isn't just my bakery, it's ours. We built it together." And she hugged me tighter than ever. I worked harder than I ever had, early mornings, late nights, but it was the first time the effort matched the reward. The first time I hired an employee, I paid her with money I earned with my own hands, and it felt unreal. Soon I wasn't just supporting my daughter, I was supporting other women who needed a chance too. My success didn't make me proud of myself, it made me proud of every version of me who didn't give up. And every time Lily did homework on a stool in the bakery corner, I thought, she'll never know poverty the way I did. She didn't grow up watching a weak mother abandoned. She grew up watching a strong mother rebuild. She watched the woman I became, not the girl who was left behind. And that changed her future. We expanded to a bigger kitchen, hired more staff, and orders started coming faster than we could bake. Local magazines wrote articles, event planners called, and one day someone said, "Jane, you're a businesswoman." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. When Lily turned 14, she hugged me after school and said, "Mum, I'm proud of you." A lifetime of tears, pain, and exhaustion, healed in 4 small words from the child I would have died for. Success didn't come to make me feel superior. It came to show me that choosing myself was worth it. And when I looked around that bakery, the cakes, the lights, the laughter, I realized something powerful. I didn't build a business to prove him wrong. I built a life to prove myself right. And I didn't know it yet, but the universe was about to bring my past back to my door. Success was the light that drew him back, not love, not guilt, but opportunity. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind you pray stays peaceful. I was rearranging display cakes at the bakery when the bell above the door chimed, and everything inside me froze. He walked in like a ghost, wearing skin, older, tired, deflated by life, but undeniably him. The man who disappeared before my daughter was born was suddenly standing in the middle of the life I built without him. He looked around the bakery like a tourist, admiring the walls, the customers, the warmth, as if he had a right to it. When his eyes landed on me, he smiled like nothing had happened. like 20 years of silence could be forgiven with a grin. He said my name softly. Jane, you look good. As if complimenting me was an apology. I didn't move toward him, not even an inch. I'd spent too long holding myself together to fall apart again. He asked if we could talk, but the truth was, he hadn't earned the right to speak to me. And then Lily walked in from the back room, laughing about something with one of the employees. She didn't know him, but when he saw her, his expression changed, like he recognized his own reflection. He stepped toward her instinctively, and without thinking, I moved in front of her like a wall. I said one word, no, not angry, just final. He froze because he realized this wasn't the scared girl he left. This was a mother protecting her child. He asked, "Does she know who I am?" And I answered, "No, and that was your decision, not mine." He tried to smile again, forcing nostalgia into his voice. But the bakery walls didn't hold his memories, they held mine. He said, "I'd like to get to know her." And I replied, "You had 19 years to try." I could see his confidence crack, not because I was cruel, but because I was no longer desperate. He looked around again, like he was searching for the version of me he once controlled. But she didn't exist anymore. And this time, when he said my name, I didn't answer. I let silence deliver the message he needed to hear. He followed me into my office at the back of the bakery, the place where I kept memories and invoices, not ghosts. He said, "I know I made mistakes, but I'm here now, and I deserve a chance." The entitlement in his voice stung. I answered, "You deserve what you earned. You earned absence." He tried to soften his voice. "Jane, I was young and I was overwhelmed, but youth is not a license to disappear." I said, "I was young too. I was overwhelmed too, but I stayed. That's the difference." He kept insisting, "I want to explain what happened." And for a second, I almost let him. But then I thought, what explanation justifies abandoning a pregnant wife? What excuse erases 19 years? So I sat down and looked him in the eye, the way he never looked at me when I begged him to stay. And I said, "This is your chance to talk, but understand, words won't rewrite what you chose." His lips trembled because for the first time, he was the one afraid of losing something. He rambled about chasing success, about investors, about how he couldn't be a father until he made it. I said, "You didn't need success to show up. You only needed love, and he had none left for us." I reminded him of the night he left, and how I begged him to stay, but he chose ambition over family. He whispered, "I didn't think I was enough." And I answered, "So you chose to be nothing instead." He thought failure made him unworthy, but abandonment made him unforgettable, in the worst way. He begged, he tried guilt, nostalgia, tears. But I didn't need to win, I just needed to be done. I said, "I don't hate you, I just don't need you." And that was the most painful truth for him to hear. I told him, "I raised our daughter without you, and she turned out extraordinary because she never learned abandonment from me." He finally realized the power shift. I wasn't the broken one anymore. I was the one he couldn't reach. And the room grew quiet, not because he ran out of excuses, but because he ran out of control. He asked, "What do you want from me?" And for the first time, I truly knew the answer. I said, Nothing. That's the gift of healing, wanting nothing from the person who hurt you. In that moment, he looked smaller. Not because I diminished him, but because I no longer magnified him. He left the office quietly, not defeated by me, but defeated by the reality he created. And for the first time, I didn't cry because of him. I cried because of who I had become. I walked out of my office and found Lily waiting in the hallway, confusion written all over her sweet face. She whispered, "Mom, who was that man? Why did you look so scared?" My heart tore open because I wanted to protect her innocence forever. But truth is its own clock. I sat her down in the quiet of the office, hands trembling, and I told her what I'd avoided for 16 years. The man you saw, he's your biological father. The words tasted like rust and old wounds. She didn't speak. Her eyelashes fluttered like she was trying to wake up from bad news. Then she asked, "Did he ever want me?" And it felt like someone reached inside my chest and tore something loose. I said, "He didn't stay, but you were never the reason he left." She asked, "Why did you never tell me?" And tears burned before they even fell. I answered, "Because I wanted every memory you had of growing up to be warm, not empty." She started crying, not for him, but for the version of him she wished she had. I wrapped my arms around her and she sobbed into my chest, a grief she didn't deserve to carry. I whispered to her, "You were never unwanted. You were a blessing, the only good thing from something painful." She choked through tears. "Is he going to take you away from me?" And I held her tighter than I ever had. I said, "No one can take us away from each other. We are not replaceable. We are home." She eventually looked up at me, cheeks wet, and her voice broke as she whispered, "I don't want to meet him." I didn't expect that. I thought curiosity would outweigh the pain, but she chose loyalty over blood. She said, "If he wasn't there for you, then I don't want him." And it shattered something inside me in a healing way. She didn't learn abandonment from me. She learned devotion. I wiped her tears gently and said, "You don't owe him anything. You never did." We walked back into the bakery together, and she stayed beside me like she was guarding her mother. He watched us, not with anger, but with the grief of a man realizing he'd returned too late. He tried to speak to her, but she didn't even look at him. Pain answered for her. And he understood. She didn't reject him because of me. She rejected him because of him. She chose the parent who stayed, and there was no argument he could make against that. For the first time since he returned, I felt peace, not fear. We didn't need him, and we never did. My daughter took my hand, and without words, said everything I had waited 16 years to hear. She didn't choose the father who created her. She chose the mother who raised her. He stood there, shoulders heavy, finally realizing that time had stolen the place he once abandoned. He said quietly, "I'm too late, aren't I?" And I nodded, not in anger, but in truth. There was a world he could have been a part of, a family he could have helped build, but he chose the exit years ago. He looked around one more time, at the bakery, at the customers, at the life he didn't get to contribute to. He whispered, "I'm proud of you." And for a moment, I saw the man I once loved, not the man who left. I answered, "Thank you." because closure sometimes sounds like kindness rather than confrontation. He asked, "Is there anything I can do now?" And the silence between us already knew the answer. I said, "Be well, live better, but don't knock again." Boundaries delivered gently, not as punishment, but peace. He nodded, not fighting, not begging, just accepting the life he left behind. He walked to the door, paused, looked at us one last time, and then left without turning back. The bell above the bakery door chimed as it closed, but this time it didn't echo pain, it echoed freedom. He was gone, and the world didn't collapse. It stood exactly where I built it. The moment the door closed behind him, the air in the bakery felt lighter, like a storm cloud finally moved on. I looked at Lily, and she looked at me, and we both smiled through tired, watery eyes. She hugged me so tightly, the kind of hug that says, "You're safe now. We're safe now." In that embrace, I realized how much of my life I built from fear, and how much more I could build from peace. We didn't talk about him again that day, because healing doesn't always begin with words. Sometimes it begins with silence. We closed the shop early and went home, made hot chocolate, sat under a blanket and watched movies until we laughed again. In that small living room, I felt more rich than any fortune could ever make me. The world was exactly as it should be, not perfect, but ours. No more waiting for people who left, no more fear of being abandoned, no more proving anything. I realized that healing isn't loud. It's quiet, gentle, and it enters on tiptoes when the pain finally runs out of space. And like that, life didn't go back to normal. It moved forward, somewhere better than before. Peace didn't arrive because everything worked out. Peace arrived because I learned to work with everything. Life didn't ask us to forget the pain. It simply kept moving forward, and we chose to move with it. The bakery flourished. New orders, new customers, new dreams. Success felt like a gentle sunrise, not a spotlight. Lily helped on weekends now, rolling dough, decorating cookies, laughing with the employees like she belonged there. Sometimes I just watched her and thought, "You were my reason to fight, and now you're my reason to rest." I no longer needed validation from anyone, not from the past, not from society, not from mistakes that weren't mine. I learned that survival is loud, but peace is quiet, and both deserve respect. We took vacations, celebrated birthdays, and filled our photo albums with moments that felt like healing stitched together. Customers came to the bakery for desserts, but they stayed because they felt love in every corner of that place. And every success from that point on wasn't fueled by pain anymore, but by purpose. The shadows of the past no longer dictated my life. They simply reminded me how far I'd come. I didn't rewrite my story to erase the beginning. I rewrote it to change the ending. And for the first time in my life, the future didn't scare me. It invited me. If you're listening to this, maybe life has broken you in places no one can see. Maybe someone left you when you needed them most, and the world expected you to survive anyway. Maybe you had to start from nothing, with no applause, no help, and no shoulder to cry on except your own. If that's you, then hear me when I say, you're not broken, you're becoming. The people who walked away from you weren't your loss. They walked away from their own blessing. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure from the ones who hurt you. Healing is the only victory you need. You don't have to prove anything to the world. Prove to yourself that you deserved better all along. Some chapters in life close without applause, without apologies, just quietly when your heart finally understands. You deserve people who choose you, not out of convenience, but out of love. You deserve a life that doesn't make you beg for affection, explanations, or presents. And if you're building your future alone right now, keep going. One day you'll thank the version of you who didn't quit. Your story isn't over because someone walked away. Sometimes that's exactly when the story truly begins. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with my pain, my healing, and my strength. If you saw yourself anywhere in this journey, please know you deserve love that stays. You are not hard to love. Someone simply didn't know how to love you, and that's not your failure. Your strength doesn't come from what you survived. It comes from how beautifully you kept going anyway. You're allowed to rest now. You're allowed to rebuild. And someday, you'll glow in places you once bled. And when that day comes, remember this: you were always enough, even before the world noticed. I'm proud of you for surviving. I'm proud of you for staying. And I'm proud of you for still hoping. Until next time, take care of your heart. It carried you further than anyone ever expected you to go.